Well, hello, friends, and thank you for joining me again in a second episode of what I call my amazing journey of spiritual awakening. In my first session, I jumped from early in my childhood all the way to a fundamental experience that happened for me only 2 weeks ago. That's a long climb, a big stretch. Well, I did it to indicate that the time between 1990 and now was really the period in which my life had changed enormously because of breakthroughs I'd had in that session way back in 1990 with a woman named Barbara Binkley. Well, that didn't culminate in a sense. The discovery of a belief within me that was driving me, motivating me, running me ragged, in effect, that I had been holding for lifetimes before. That is, I was born with it because of past lives, which I realized, oh my gosh, I didn't even know, are there past lives? Yes, there are. Well, that finally got cleared. And it got cleared thanks to the incredible work of David Maria and Vivika Kalma, who I'll be interviewing here on Spirit Partners, who have joined us. Well, great to my relief, the intervening 2 weeks since then have been absolutely incredible for me. And I realize that the work I did with them, this gigantic release of what I was calling failed missions, my soul was holding as failed missions, that has brought an enormous amount of benefit to me, of how much my life has shifted even further. Well, I need to go back and say that all was not rosy at the time that I first encountered this belief of you'll never be done working, because not only was I working all the time with my colleagues on an educational transformation endeavor that was really beginning to take hold in North America, but we ran into major difficulties. And the difficulties were linked to the fact that our work was very transformational. Not only was it changing the system in ways that were going to be much more responsive and supportive to students, but it was elevating and deepening tremendously the concept of learning that students had. And eventually, we were really talking about a multi-dimensional conception of learning and a model of how that learning could be cultivated that was not only what we ended up calling one-dimensional cognitive learning. That is, it's the things that happen in your brain, but that's it. They don't go any farther than what's there as what you know and what you can figure out and analyze cognitively. But dimension number two was, well, what can you do, actually tangibly do with what you know and is going on in your head? Well, it didn't take us long to realize that every time you want to do something, you're doing it somewhere. And that somewhere is the context or the situation in which the student needs to do the work and perform the abilities and skills that they've developed. Well, deeper than that is a fourth dimension, which is the kinds of qualities and dispositions in the student, all right, that give them the motivation, the interest, the drive, the creativity, the sparkle to move forward in a qualitative way with what they endeavor and do in their life. So let's just say that we were promoting a four-dimensional model of learning at that time, which was running counter to the increasingly narrow perspectives of what was unfolding in the policy world at the time. And that is more and more focus on accountability-oriented testing for what do students know, can they get the right answers on the subjects that they're studying, are they developing basic skills, none of which had to do with developing and nurturing and honoring this deeper character in students that was going to be essential if they were going to lead empowered, informed lives. Well, that was our focus. It's what will happen after they leave school, not just what happens in school. So at that point, around 1990 to 93, et cetera, our work was expanding enormously. The influence of the work was expanding enormously. And we thought, wow, this movement is really going to take hold. Well, wherever it took hold, it also was gaining opposition because it was breaking the mold. And the breaking the mold finally happened late in 1993 and early 1994. Which was accompanied by big political action that was very conservative and reactive in the United States at the time. And within a short amount of time, opposition to our work marshaled at a national level. And there we were with a group of consultants and a very appealing model to educators, but it was just drowned out in the political reaction that occurred at the time. Well, that led to dark days. And as I experienced them, they were close to what Tomei Schnitzius has been describing in one of his videos for Spirit Partners, and that is the dark night of the soul. Well, it was very dark night for me, and I had literally no work during a lengthy period of time, about 3 years or so in the middle 90s, and I think the thing that saved me is that I was living in Colorado, up in the Rocky Mountains, and enjoyed winters of skiing, and my skiing improved a lot, even though my career seemed to be absolutely stalled, and our work was absolutely driven underground. Well, a friend called and said, there's a woman in town, and I think you would benefit from working with her. Would you be interested? She's got appointments available. And I said, well, okay, when? And she said, well, at 10:30 this morning. That was at 9:30 when she called me. Well, this friend turned out to be someone who had lived in our county up there. She was a psychic, turns out a very powerful one. But she had a number of healing modalities that she used in her work. So it was not simply the sessions that maybe typical psychics do. So this was to be sort of a healing process, et cetera, for whatever came up. Well, I met with this woman. Her name was Mona Lisa Snodgrass. Yes, she had lived in the county, moved off to Arkansas, but was back visiting. And we had an incredible session, incredible for me and incredible for her, because in the course of this session, as she and I were sitting across the table from each other, processing some information and some feelings that came through, she went into almost panic, okay, which I didn't do at that moment, because the Archangel Michael appeared behind me and was shaking my shoulders energetically and saying, "What are you doubting?" Well, she and I had done a process with a series of stones and things that she had there, and she discovered that what she called the doubt stone, was standing in the way of all these other stones that offered great promise, et cetera, but I had doubt in the way. Well, what could that doubt possibly be? I wondered, having not worked for about 3 years. Well, turns out that Michael got the picture apparently, and my job was stop doubting and get out there and do what needs to be done. Well, I didn't know how that was going to happen, but not long after that, I received a phone call from a professor in Ohio saying, I have a whole team of people here from the country of South Africa, and they're interested in outcome-based education, which was the name of our work. And they would like to meet with you. Can you arrange that? Well, that all got arranged. I met with them. That opened a door of significant opportunity, because in the fall of 1997, I took my first trip to South Africa, because indeed their whole national government was planning on a major nationwide school reform, and they had picked up information about outcome-based education. I had been identified as the father of outcome-based education, and they wanted to meet with me. And what I discovered with them, and they discovered with me, is that they really had no idea what the concept really was about. So that led to the invitation to go over. That led to more things and led to more things. Well, in the meantime, I had been having sessions with Mona, what she called readings. And I would call her up and basically say, Mona, it's time for me to get a little bit more information about how I can move forward in my life, et cetera, et cetera. So we were going back and forth. And eventually in 1998, after my first trip to South Africa, Mona informed me that she was going to be in Denver at a fair and selling some of her things there. And we could have a session face to face, because up to this point, everything had been on the phone ever since that first initial one. So we met, and in the course of this process we were doing with each other, she said, I think there's a book you need to read. And I said, well, okay, what is it? She said, well, it's called Conversations with God. And I said, well, yeah, I think I've heard of that. And she said, yeah, let me see. And she's checking in with the universe. She says, yeah, I think the author is a guy named Walsch. See if you can get the book. Well, on the way home is a bookstore. So I stopped in, and yes, indeed, they had a shelf full of this book because it was extremely popular. Had been read, in fact, by the time I got there, by millions of people all across the world, because it had been translated into many different languages. But anyway, I got my copy and was absolutely blown away by what I read. That first book, okay, by Neale Donald Walsch, the first book of Conversations with God, was basically about the nature of the soul. And it blew my mind, absolutely blew my mind. Well, if I thought that past lives in 1990, if I thought that past lives had been what, impossible, etc. What was in this book, among its many, many things about the nature of the soul that totally blew my paradigm of souls and existence, etc., out of the water at that point, was the casual comment going back and forth between Neale and God. Well, Hitler went to heaven. And Neale is arguing back, how could Hitler go to heaven? I mean, this evil, terrible person, blah, 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 blah. And the response back was, well, there's only one place that souls go. Well, all our religions tell us that, yeah, there are two places that souls go. One is a very happy place, and one is a very negative place. And the negative place is something you surely want to avoid. So you better keep going to church more, et cetera, et cetera. But God is saying there's only one place you go, and that's to the very happy place, except that you face a life review. And a life review lets you see, just like a moving picture, except you feel the emotion of it, of the consequences that your life has made and on people around you, whoever you've affected. Well, in Hitler's case, that was a lot of people, and we don't know how that life review went, etc. But he went to the only place that souls go. So that blew my mind. I mean, it's like, really? Okay, well, that reinforced some things that I had gotten in this session with Barbara Binkley back in 1990. But okay, this is pretty heavy duty. Well, later in the book, there is this conversation going around about this biblical figure, Moses. And everybody knows that Moses went up on a mountain and met with God and came down with the Ten Commandments. Well, the conversation back and forth reveals that God is saying to Neale, well, the Ten Commandments don't exist. Okay, okay. What do you do with that? When the entire Christian religion and Judaism are all based on the reality that the Ten Commandments absolutely do exist. Well, God says to Neale, I don't command anybody to do anything. Now, in that case, these really were, and they got misinterpreted and everything got mistranslated. But these were 10 commitments I made because the Israelites at the time were living this totally chaotic, disorganized, counterproductive existence out in this desert, walking around, etc., because they had come out of Egypt, presumably. And God was basically saying to Moses, I commit to you that if your people will do these 10 things, their lives will be incredibly better. You can get more organized, etc., and move forward. Well, this got turned into 10 commandments about what you absolutely have to do, or you're going to go to the very negative place, except that the negative place doesn't exist. And this just creates more and more what? Distortions in the story that we've all been culturally told exists. Well, okay, I finished book one. In fact, I read it twice, just to be sure I wasn't really missing anything and getting things misunderstood. And in the course of that first book, God says, well, there are going to be 3 books. Well, if there are going to be 3 books, maybe there's a book 2. So I go out and search and find book 2. Well, book 2 turns out to be all about the social institutions we have created in our societies and how they function or dysfunction based on our beliefs about what reality is, what souls are, and how human life unfolds from there. Well, God is relating all these different things about how our institutions aren't working for us because of our beliefs and our behaviors, et cetera, that are all really grounded in misunderstandings about the fundamental nature of who we are. Well, one of the chapters in this book, too, is a chapter about education. And when I got there, it was like, well, this is going to be interesting. Let's see what they have to say here. Well, it turns out that the conversation quickly gets to basically extolling and praising the work of two major figures, who appeared early in the 20th century. All right, Rudolf Steiner, whose work translated into the Waldorf schools that exist today, and a woman named Maria Montessori, and her work has also burgeoned into a very popular alternative model that appears all over the world. And I'm going to say especially in the United States and some of the other countries that I have visited. Well, they're going along praising them, and pretty soon the conversation between them turns to all the opposition that has occurred toward enlightened models of education and education that is delving deeper into who is the human being and bringing out the empowering and creative nature of humans. And pretty soon, this conversation starts to point exactly to the kind of work we had done and the kind of opposition that had been mounted to it. And I became afraid almost of turning the page because I would see my name. Well, I turned the pages. I did not see my name, but the whole latter section of that chapter was absolutely about, okay, the ordeal that my colleagues and I and the educators who were working with us around the country, okay, what they had gone through, et cetera. The opposition, the oppression, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, there I was. And along came eventually book 3. And I became very interested in book 3 because it was all about the universe we live in and what the whole nature of the cosmos is actually like. That is our universe. And it got into issues about um, uh, extraterrestrials and, which God called HEBs, highly evolved beings. All right. And that, yes, there were other highly evolved beings in the universe that were more highly evolved than humans. And da 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 da. And that conversation went on. And yeah, it was unbelievable in terms of its scope because it opened up more and more and more of what did not conform to our, what I call, three-dimensional way of understanding and living out our lives, which is incredibly more constrained than we want to believe. Well, reading the end of the book, okay, God finally summarizes, okay, you've been reading all this stuff. Here's what it comes to. 3 simple things. And it's these 3 simple things that underlie, I'm going to say, not only the spirit partners' work that we want to bring to the world now, but there are countless other individuals who have come to understand and are promoting this work in terms of the spiritual work that they're doing? Well, proposition number one, okay, in Neale's books, number one is we are all one. That is, when you understand the nature of the universe, you understand the nature of the soul, you put those two things together, we are all one unified, united field of spiritual beings that are infinite in our capacities to do things, okay, because the soul exists at a plane higher than our 3D, and the eternity of the soul. That is, it goes on and on and on because there are past lives, and the soul just continues to come back and bring us enlightenment as best it can, but also for it to fulfill its own need to grow and evolve. Okay, that's number one. Number two, there's enough. There's enough what? There's enough food. There are enough resources, etc., for everyone on the planet to live abundant lives if we would just share it. But we don't just share it. Those who have tend to hoard it, and those who don't have to scrape after it, etc., which leads to, okay, civilization after civilization, culture after culture, nation after nation, of total separation of individuals from each other and from the abundance that fundamentally is there. So there's enough abundance. There's enough of what really makes life rich and worthwhile, but we operate in a separation paradigm that basically says everybody's in it for themselves. Let's see what you get, et cetera, et cetera. And while some cultures actually are very communal in nature and collaborative in nature and cooperative and compassionate, et cetera, and support each other and share, that is absolutely not true in terms of the big picture of everything. And I'll say it's certainly not true in terms of how the education system, the modern education system of the world operates, because we were saying we could expand opportunities for students to benefit more, way more students getting way more benefit from their learning if we would eliminate some of the restrictive conditions and elements that operate in education. Well, okay, those are the first two. The third proposition is you don't have to do anything. Okay, all right, you don't have to do anything. Yes, comma, okay, to be who you really are. That is, fulfilling your inner nature as a soul and as a being, okay, does not require any special activity, etc. The soul is there. It's there to assist you. It's going to go back to the happy place for renewal, etc., after it leaves your physical body. All right. There's nothing you have to do to prevent or improve, okay, the assistance that the soul can give you. You don't have to follow all these rules about what the churches or the religions say you have to do to be okay with God or whatever they call God. Okay. The soul is going to be just fine, and you are going to be just fine the more you get connected with the essence of that soul. So those three propositions, okay, we are all one, there's enough, and there's nothing you have to do, okay, are in violation of how we have chosen to live our lives down here in 3D, but they are fundamentally propositions that are absolutely true given the real nature of things. Well, I was disappointed because I had learned a tremendous amount from these three books that absolutely blew my mind. But the next Christmas came, and under the Christmas tree was a present that looked like a book. And it was from my sister Shaw, who you'll be meeting here in Spirit Partners. And sure enough, there was another book, even though God said there will only be three books. Maybe he meant there will be at least three books. But there was a fourth book, and it was called Friendship with God. And I devoured it and found the book to be inordinately helpful because it helped to explain in somewhat simpler terms with better metaphors for me, at least, some of the incredible complexity and mind-boggling things that were in the first books, like there is no time. Time doesn't exist. Well, time sure does exist here in our modern world. In fact, everything is driven by time that is measured one way or another, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But in the fundamental essence of things on higher planes, there is no time. Well, that was in book 4. And I thought, well, okay, all right, so there's going to be 4 books and that's it. Well, a year later at Christmas, I'm returning from a trip to South Africa, and the plane lands in Denver, and a voice in my head, clear as bell, says, go to the bookstore. Okay, I'll go to the bookstore, but I'm going to get my luggage first. So I get my luggage first, and while getting the luggage, the voice says, there's a new Neale Donald Walsch book there for you. Okay, all right, voice, here I go. So I go to the bookstore that I know is up there in the main area of the airport and walk up to, it's a small one, and walk up to the counter and ask the man, do you have a book by Neale Donald, a new book by Neale Donald Walsch here? And he reaches under the counter and says, yes, sir, here's your book. Okay, thank you. Well, I don't know who the voice is, but the voice was spot on. There was the book, and it was called Communion with God. It was the 5th book, and is the most absolutely amazing book. It is not a conversation. It is a straight, we call them download. It is a straight download, straight input from God about the 10 illusions of humans. And the illusions are things we believe that make everything go haywire because they're false illusions. They're true illusions. They aren't true, but we believe they're true. And because they're true, but because life doesn't work because we think they're true, we create an illusion to compensate for the illusion that doesn't work. And we pile them on one after the other until there are 10, all right? And this book explains what every illusion is based on, all right, why it's a false illusion, okay, how it inappropriately and inadequately really compensates for the illusion that precedes it, et cetera, and then how to counteract all those illusions and get back to a fundamental truth. The fundamental truth is that God needs nothing. Well, our civilization and pre-civilizations on Earth all have created gods because they think gods are doing all these things to them or to the climate or to the planet in the case of earthquakes and volcanoes, and it's punishment for what they have done, and on and on and on. So gods need, and then tribute or sacrifices or one thing and another, okay? And God is saying in this delivery, I mean, I won't call it a sermon, but imagine that it's a sermon. Basically, God needs nothing. Well, how would an entity, an energy, okay, a being, a capacity, whatever you want to call it, that created the whole universe, it created the whole universe and everything in the universe, how could that God need anything? Okay, is it that insecure, that inadequate? Okay, is its ego that fragile that it needs people to worship it? No, it's there to basically enjoy all of the opportunities and abundance, etc., that life offers you. Okay, but we think God needs something. Consequently, we have created all of these things, etc., to make God happy. But since that doesn't work because we're still in travail and misery, etc., we create another belief. So this book is about how we have stacked all these false assumptions and false beliefs on each other and have ourselves so tied up in all of this, we don't know how to get out of the mess. Well, it wasn't a simple book. It's not a simple book. So I read it a second time. God, okay, it was a little bit better. And I was in the process of reading it a third time when I decided, okay, I think I remember that in this book is an epilogue, which Neale put in most of the other books, because in the epilogue, Neale Donald Walsch, is basically saying, well, there are other people, other groups, other institutions, other books, et cetera, you can read, et cetera, to expand, your knowledge of these kinds of topics. So let me just look at that, okay? Maybe there's another book here that can make some of this a little simpler or whatever it is. So I go back into the epilogue, and in the epilogue, Neale is saying, oh, and by the way, we here at the Conversations with God Foundation, we're planning to launch an educational model based on the work and the knowledge that has come through these books. Well, I read that and basically say, well, how can they do an educational model without me? Because, I am the king of educational transformation and all of that sort of stuff. And by this time, I was very much into believing all of the things the books were revealing about a different and vaster way of just living your life in a more enlightened way. So it's like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. So in my uncertainty, it's like, well, what do I do? Because they say he says in the book, if you want to participate, etc., um, contact us, and there's even a phone number in the book. Well, remember doubt? Well, I'm doubting. And it's like, oh my gosh, here's this famous, incredible guy, Walsch. And if I call that phone number, I mean, what good is that going to do? Because, and I imagine in my head, see, this is all imagination. This is what we go into. I imagine, oh my gosh, they've got this thing half designed and half done. And oh my gosh. So anyway, I don't call them, I call Mona. And I say, Mona, Walsh is planning to do this thing, et cetera, and I don't know what I should do. And Mona says back to me, well, he's waiting to hear from you. Okay, he's waiting to hear from me. Sure he is. Here is this incredible guy, all right, who's written now 5 books, sold by the tens of millions of copies all over the world, translated into, I think they said 26 languages. So it's like, okay, yeah. I said, Mona, I know he's just sitting by his phone waiting for it to ring because Spady is going to call him, right? And Mona says, no, come on. He can't do this work without you. Okay, all right. He can't do this work without me. All right. Okay, Mona, thank you. Click. Well, I call the number. Nobody answers. Okay, a day later, I call the number again. Nobody answers. Okay, so I keep calling the number for about 5 straight days. And for me, time is running out because in another day or two, I'm leaving on a trip for 2 weeks to Australia, okay, to do educational consulting work there. And I have imagined in my head, oh my gosh, in 2 weeks, they will be doing even more incredible things, et cetera, and I won't be involved, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So in somewhat desperation, I call the number again and someone answers. A very nice gentleman, and he tells me, oh yes, we want to move forward with this. There's going to be a special event in August, and this was May, and nothing's going to happen. I assure you nothing will happen until this event because we're inviting people, to come and participate and help us formulate how this can move forward, and we'll be very happy to have you there. Well, it's hard to believe, but okay, I go there. And it's in Ashland, Oregon, and so that doesn't require too much of a drive from my sister's place. And so anyway, my sister Shaw and I, we go to this event. And the opening begins on a Friday evening, and Neale is the speaker. And I am incredibly impressed with the presentation he gives. I mean, he is a polished, wonderful, articulate speaker. And I'm sitting there just, having spoken to my tens and tens of thousands of people, et cetera, but never with the eloquence I feel of him. And he finishes his presentation and sort of comes wandering toward the back of the room, where I'm sitting toward the back of the room to talk with the guys at the sound table back there who have they control the microphones and everything. And I decide, okay, here's my opportunity. So I go up to him and I said, Mr. Walsch, my name is Bill Spady, and I disagree with you. Okay, so that's a great way to meet somebody who you hold in great reverence. And I disagree with you. And very graciously, he says, well, what about? And I said, well, you said in your presentation that you thought the most important thing, et cetera, that we could be teaching, et cetera, in these schools is the fundamental truth of those three propositions. Okay, we are all one, there's enough, and there's nothing you have to do. Okay. And I said, but I think the most important thing that we could be teaching people is about the 10 illusions of human beings, because until they break out of those 10 illusions, they won't be able to hear the message of we are all one, et cetera, et cetera. And he said, I've been thinking about that myself, and I think you may be right. Well, I could hardly believe it, but I went on my way and he went on his way, and the session comes back together, and he's holding a question and answer, and so he's fielding questions, answers, remarks from people across the audience. And I finally am brave enough to raise my hand, having heard lots and lots of these questions and what I'm assuming is in the kind of minds and agendas of people as they raise these points. And I raise my hand, and he calls on me eventually. And I very boldly say, I think it would be a giant mistake to call these Heartlight, because this was going to be the name, Heartlight schools. Okay? Because as soon as we say the name school, everybody is going to conjure up in their heads, okay, the school they went to. And the school they went to, okay, has grade levels, and it has classrooms, and it's brick buildings, and it's got curriculum, and it's got tests, and it's got all this stuff, because that's the kind of school they went to, and that's not the kind of school we want. And he said, well, then what should we call them? Okay. And I said, well, Heartlight Learning Communities. And he said, wow, that's great. Yeah, we're going to do that. Let's do that. And in disbelief, I sit down and I say, gosh, Mona, I mean, that's 2 out of 2. Oh my gosh. Well, the evening ends, and Neale and his wife go to the door, and they're shaking hands with people and thanking them for coming, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And finally, it's my turn in line. And he recognizes me by this time and says, you're going to have a great day tomorrow, because his wife, Nancy, she's going to be doing this. And then they're going to have a big discussion about this and that and this and that, et cetera, et cetera. He said, I won't be here, but I know this is really going to be a big success. And I say, Neale, you have to be here. You have to be here. These people have no idea what they are talking about. And you have the stature and you have the understanding of what it's going to take to pull this together. You have got to be here, or this will be chaos. And he pauses, and he almost goes into a second or two of reflection. And he says, you're right. I will. And I said, thank you. Whoa, 3 out of 3. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Well, to make that part of the story much shorter, the next day things go back and forth and upside and down and sideways and this and that, but he was there. And often I found myself sitting next to him as things unfolded. And I had managed to give him a copy of the latest book I had done, which is called Beyond Counterfeit Reforms. And also, when things got kind of weird, I would offer ideas to him about, look, this doesn't make any sense, because if we do this, then blah, blah, blah. And he would stop and interrupt and people, no, we need to think about this in a different way, da da da. And then he would say exactly what I had told him. Okay. And the biggest one finally came when I told him that, um, Neale, in our work, why, that is your purpose, why drives what you're going to do, okay, drives how. And all these people are talking about how, and they don't know what, and they don't know why. Okay, they haven't done the fundamental things. And he stops and he says, people, why drives what drives how, and da 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 da. It's like I couldn't believe it. Well, the next morning, as I was walking toward the room where things start, he was in an adjacent room. And I just sort of, as I was going by, I saw him and he saw me and he waved me in. And I went in and he said, very briefly, I'm going to appoint you as one of 3 people to move this initiative forward. Well, okay, that happened. We had lunch together to kind of plan out how would these 3 people, and the other 2 he named were, I thought, perfect choices from all the interaction that had gone on. What are we going to do? How are we going to proceed? What's the best thing? And he basically said, well, why don't you on such and such dates come to my home and we'll discuss this further. So the 2 other people and I left. We communicated a lot in the meantime. And we went to meet with him. And while having breakfast at a little coffee shop there in Ashland, Oregon, I had a realization. I mean, I call them a hit. It's like, oh my God, because I saw a way of taking the elements in Neale's books and linking them with a key element in my work, which we call the 5 C's. That is 5 words that start with the letter C, that if we would focus on expanding and building consciousness, creativity, collaboration, competence, and compassion in students, everything would be wonderful. And I was getting great responses from people around the world, okay, around this 5 C's model. And I saw it fitting in directly to what Neale had done there. And then I realized, oh my gosh, there are 2 other things in our work that could be added, and the whole thing would be a totally coherent thing. And I sketch it out, literally on a piece of paper for my other 2 colleagues, and they thought it was absolutely wonderful, blah, blah, blah. We get to Neale's house, and he says, I can't meet with you right now because I have a deadline. And if I don't have this into my publisher at 11 o'clock this morning, the sky will fall and the book will never be published and all this kind of stuff. And the 2 of them went into his office to help him do this stuff. And I sat there copying out, okay, examples of this model. And they finally came back. I handed it to him and it was like, oh my God, this is it. Here it is. It's put together. The work he wanted and the realistic things that could unfold in a learning community that was guided by these underlying principles, et cetera, and that incorporated the 5 C's, okay, there was all in one model. And it was called Heartlight Education, is what we ultimately decided. Well, things went from there and things went from there. And it turns out that my other 2 partners in this endeavor, within 6 months, just found that their lives were in overwhelm and they dropped away. And there I was, the leader of this whole initiative. And fortunately, a man had stepped in um, who had made a fortune on the stock market and had said, I would like to, this is to for Neale, I would like to contribute to work you do in education, et cetera, et cetera. And suddenly there we had the financial basis to get something started. So things unfolded from there. It was absolutely astonishing to me. Notice the voices talking, Mona realizing these things, seeing into this in a way that was deeper and more profound than I could. Well, there we were starting, okay, in 2001, and ultimately then implementing some things, first of all, in South Africa, where I had been going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, all right, in 2002, called Heartlight Education. Well, the good news is that the model had incredible appeal to the people who were already sort of enlightened, okay? And however, to the parents of potential students, they wanted to be sure that we were going to do all the things that the regular schools did because they wanted their kids to get qualifications and pass tests and do all of these rituals that education did. And we were there with something that was fundamentally different in their eyes and that, was experimental. Well, it wasn't experimental at all if you simply laid it out and trained, okay, whoever the people were that, yes, we're going to do this rather than that, and we're going to follow this kind of principle rather than a traditional kind of principle. But it's an organizing principle. It's a coordinating principle. It can work. Da, 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 da. Well, it unfolded, and we had an alternative site in Port Elizabeth, South Africa for 2 years that drew a couple of dozen students, high school age, and it was basically something that really, really worked. Well, when the grant period ended, because we had a 2-year grant, things didn't continue because the parents weren't able to support it, and we didn't have a financial base for doing that endeavor. So in a sense, it was another failed mission of Bill Spady's, which is what I explained in the first session, was so fundamental and had to ultimately be cleared from my soul's story, okay, that it was just caught in this syndrome of failed missions. So not only was the outcome-based education mission in the United States a failed mission because of all the political reaction, but now this Heartlight experience turned out to be one that, despite the enormous promise and potential in this model, turned out to be symbolically another failed mission. So, given the fact that I was able to finally clear the energy and the attachments of that went on past life after past life after past life after past life that I explained last time. Now, what I'm doing with spirit partners is absolutely what my heart, what the universe, and what my colleagues are all aligned with and empowered to bring forward. So I invite you, join me in a next session, because you're going to be in for, as I was, an astonishing surprise, an astonishing level of awakening of what happened, what's real, what's true about Bill Spady and his soul and the spiritual journey that he's on, that I absolutely, absolutely couldn't believe when it happened. And you'll understand why. So thanks. See you then. And be well. Bye-bye.